Good evening, one and all. Welcome to yet another installment of Two Docs and a Grunt. We are one doc short. I am doc number one, Andrew Barry. I'm a psychologist and psychoanalyst. I specialize in working with veterans and first responders fighting with post-traumatic stress disorder. And with that, I hand it over to Nate.
And I'm Nate Emery. Did 22 years in the Marine Corps, 12 years enlisted, 10 years as an officer, and then since 2012 I've split my time between contractor work and government civilian. And that's it on me.
Okay. And tonight we have with us, this will be the formal intro, the one and only Kyle Gara. Gara? Whatever. Gara, okay. Gesundheit. He is a six-year veteran of the volunteer fire service as well, who has worked on multiple high-density, high-risk calls, and he is currently on active duty with the United States Navy and is in San Diego. Welcome to this evening's podcast, my man. I met Kyle in the fire service during the brief period of time I was involved with it. And one of the things that we were going to be talking about tonight is the loss of a 21-year-old firefighter by the name of Ryan Gagliardi. And his folks are listening in, we hope are listening in right now in the studio audience. And they've given me carte blanche to speak openly and honestly about what happened to Ryan. Ryan and Kyle were very tight for a very long time. Ryan was 21 years of age. He was a first lieutenant in one of the local fire companies. He was a rising star, a prodigy at just about everything he undertook. Started and finished high school early, as I understand. The same thing for community college. And I had the pleasure of meeting up with him when we were doing EMT training together. He sent me referrals. He knew exactly who I am and what I do for a living. And so this past September, I want to say, the word got out quickly that Ryan Gagliardi committed suicide. And nobody knows why. To this day, there's all kinds of speculation, but this kid, with all the talent in the world, a prodigy, why he would end himself, nobody seems to know. And one of the things we are hoping to do tonight is to get an open and honest dialogue going about mental health issues, severe mental health issues. Not just in the world of veterans, but for first responders as well. I attended Ryan's wake and funeral, and there were at least, Kyle, what would you say, like 4 fire and ambulance companies there, maybe more. And he was given a full regalia send-off, and it was just overwhelming to behold. So, with that, my man, Kyle, if you're up to it, tell us all about Ryan and what he meant to you.
Yeah, so, the beginning of our relationship wasn't all sunshine and daisies. We spent the first 2 years in the firehouse butting heads. And it did hit a boiling point one time where we almost got into the physical manner of expressing ourselves. And then after that, the last 4 years that we were in the firehouse together, we were probably just, close as could be. I ran well over 500 calls with Ryan over a 6-year period. So, we got to know each other in the spiritual spiritual sense, if you'll call it that. And we saw a lot of hairy shit. Um, then he got accepted into multi EMS, and then his amount of shit that he saw just jumped. Um, and then the rest is really history. We became best of friends. My friend Jonathan had joined in his last 3 years of service, and the three of us made up what Jonathan called the Golden Lieutenant's line. And yeah, best 6 years of my life, in a manner of speaking.
So far.
So far.
Isn't that crazy how people that initially you butt heads with can end up being some of the people you're the closest to? And I think it's because when that happens, it's probably because we're so alike with those people, right?
Mm-hmm.
That the things that irritate us about ourselves, are irritating us when we see them in them.
Yep.
But, But I understand. I can imagine going out on calls, so many calls together. You can't help but grow closer.
I was told by a few people who knew both of us that we actually did kind of have a similar personality, especially in those 2 years. We were very hot-headed. We had to know everything, or we just couldn't be there. Always had to be on top. So it was a little hairy. So definitely a little bit of the same personality there. And then the last 4 years we got older, into our late teens, 20s. So then in that time period, you can definitely see the differences in what made us us, and not the other side of us that were young and dumb. And
You can do that here.
I'm starting to, but I'm keeping it together.
I know. Well, you still can, because the message is, what you show with tears is, the message is simple, is I love you, brother, and I miss you.
Yeah. God knows I do. So carrying into how I found out, regular day school is in Great Lakes. Late September, so the weather was holding, but it was starting to decline. I'd hate to be there now. It's like negative 10 last time I checked. Some days. Oof. Anyway, I just gotten out of class, and we marched back to the barracks. And granted, there's probably 200, anxious sailors waiting to get back, get undressed, go on liberty. And I actually got a text from a friend of ours from back in the day. He said what happened to Ryan. So I'm sitting there thinking that if, something bad happens and he's still alive, he's obviously not by his phone right now. So I called Jonathan, and that is when I had found out he shot himself. After that, I pretty much shoved everybody aside, walked into the barracks. I pulled one of the barracks duty officers aside, and I said, listen, we need to talk. And he's like, can it wait? Because he's with a group of new students coming in. I said, no, this has to happen now. And so we go outside, and I told him what happened. He probably sat me for an hour and a half, just let me vent to him, because this GSM-2 at that barracks had witnessed some hairy situations as well. It's always a good amount of stress going around. And so he kind of was able to manage manage around that. Um, and so after that conversation, I left my room, and that's when it really hit me. I got on Facebook, and then just looking at a picture of his face, that's when it broke right down. So, and then the next 2 weeks were hard, but I pushed through it, and then I came home for the funeral, and so that definitely I've had my fair share of bad moments, but that's definitely the worst. That one hit much harder than all the rest.
Yeah, it's not really one you can distance yourself and focus on your work, right?
Mhm.
You know, I understand, like, for as horrible as it can be being on a call, at least you can just, focus down to whatever the task at hand is, and, you can kind of sanitizes it a little bit so you can do what you need to do. But, yeah, when somebody you know and love, I can't imagine that.
Mhm. And the one of the bigger things that hit hard was that, like, after calls, and even if we weren't at the firehouse, we just had a night of a couple drinks, getting together, sitting around the fire. That was our way of de-stressing. That was kind of like our therapy, in a way. So there was myself, Jonathan, Ryan, and a couple others. So when you take out one of those prime, you know, pieces of the puzzle of that group, um, it gets very hard for that group to kind of have that same bond in a way.
And the dynamic changes, right?
Right, right. And, like, every time I go home, you can definitely feel the difference without him being there, being present. Um, yeah. He always, lit up a room when you walked in, and then he would light up himself, get all red, and the ball busting begins, and he couldn't compose himself. So,
It should be added, by the way, that Fuller Road Fire Station presented his parents with Firefighter of the Year award for him in memoriam.
Wow.
Yeah.
well deserving. He definitely did a lot for the firehouse and all of us. So I'm very glad that he was even posthumously awarded that.
What was he like to behold on a fire scene?
Um, on the fire scene, he was a rock. I mean, not like distant, but just well composed. Um, we'd get there, he'd give us all our instruction if he was the officer in charge, whatnot. We'd break off, do that. If he didn't know what to do, he'd search for the answers and relay that back to us. And you could always count on him to pick up slack where it's needed. Um, none of us know everything, and the day you say you do, it's time to skedaddle from the fire service, because then,
Mm-hmm.
So he was that person to always be the backup. Um, there's never really not a time where you couldn't find him kind of helping others while also being proactive. He ensured that everybody was doing their job. He was doing his job, but he was also being lax enough to say, hey, we gotta get this done. Um, hey, we gotta get that done. You need some help? All right, let me help you out. Let's get this done quick, to the point. So,
It's one of the best things about any type of service is when you have leaders that are like that, where they can be dead serious, but you know that they can goof around and be relaxed, and then in a second get back to business. But they've earned everybody's respect in a way that people don't get upset when they switch back and forth because you understand. But what I've never had, and it sounds like you were in the position where he became senior to you. Is that right?
yes, he was basically the lead lieutenant for the last 3 years of his service. They had amended a bylaw that we had to get him in. They thought that he was ready, and he was. I mean, he always asked questions if you didn't know, because being a lieutenant, obviously, you have to handle a lot more BS, but not so at the same time. So, he asked those kind of questions, but when it came down to it, he was the person to go to. He always the person to lean on from the people above him. So
That's got to be pretty. I imagine that would be pretty cool if I was, a good close friend of mine ended up being in charge of me, being one of my leaders, because you already know him, you already trust him, right? And then to have him there leading, and from everything you've talked about so far, I mean, it's obvious that you don't have, you have no doubts on what kind of a leader he was. So
right.
I can imagine that would, I mean, on top of being proud, but you're like, I know this guy, so you already know when something's going to happen, and what his response is going to be or how he's going to approach it. But I would imagine you also, as his close friend, probably behind closed doors, you probably got to hear about the stuff that frustrated him too. Being that kind of a leader, but so that must have been kind of neat for him too to be able to confide in you like that.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, there's a lot of confidence between all of us, and if we were having a problem, we made it known. Like there's no holding back. I mean, we didn't seek out help really from anybody else besides our group, which may be kind of the wrong approach, but at the same time, it's what we found comfort in, and it's how we cope with the stress of the job. So,
Yeah. Like when you're saying that you guys would sit around afterwards, right, together,
yeah,
just
yep.
decompressing. I think that's pretty normal. I mean, as far as when it comes to, well, definitely with military, and we've heard it too from a lot of people in the first responder communities, law enforcement. It's like sometimes just spending some time around somebody who went through it with you or understands, but not having to say a word about it can like relieve so much more stress than talking about it.
A comfortable silence, I believe, is how it's referred to.
Yeah.
Yep. For example, with sitting around the fire, the last call I worked, I was actually the officer on duty crew. We had gotten called to the Northway for a traffic accident. One vehicle involved, possibly two, as the call came out. When we arrived on scene, we had found out that the vehicle that was on fire was completely destroyed, and that there was no second vehicle on fire. It was actually a gas tank that flew. So basically what happened was
Oh yeah.
intoxicated driver was doing about 135, if I remember the report correctly, and he completely crushed the vehicle. And after that call, that Sunday night, the night after duty crew, we gathered around the fire, had a couple beers, and you know, toasted in the victim's honor because she unfortunately passed away. And we talked about how we felt after the fact, what we did, what we could have done better. So, well, it's therapy, and it's also a critique at the same time.
Yeah, it's like an after action, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, because it's better to do it right afterwards than try to figure it out the next time it happens.
Mhm.
There's a lot of that in the military, a lot of dry runs, or decision games, scenarios. You walk through guided discussions, ask people what they would do, and then somebody will bring up something they experienced.
By the way, Ryan's mom, Cindy, she's trying to get on to the studio audience right now. So,
All right. Hopefully, you get her soon.
yep.
You ever have anything just completely corny happen out on a call when you're with Ryan? Just something that we just can't help it. I mean, people have asked us in the military side, right? They're like, what is something that nobody would understand but makes you laugh? That because in the context of what you do on a day-to-day basis, it was funny,
Mm-hmm.
But if somebody else, a complete stranger, was to walk up on it, they'd look at you like you're nuts for laughing about it. You have any stories like that?
After about 2 years of doing it, probably every overdose call we went to was something jokes were cracked and whatnot, not towards the victim but towards what was going on, because you get so used to it, and then it starts to get in your head like, what am I doing here? Like, why are we doing this again and again and again? So there was some stuff blurted out there. Going to calls was probably where the funniest stuff was. We'd get on the engine, depending on the call, we'd get all our stuff together, and then we're either taking a minute to get there, or 6-7 minutes to get there, depending on where it was in the town. So that's it doesn't seem like a lot of time, but that's actually a lot of downtime when you're in the engine.
Yeah.
So we just come up with the dumbest topics to talk about. I can't think off the top of my head some of them, just because there's so many. But there was a lot of laughs. A lot of times his face would just turn beet red, top to bottom. There's been a few times where a few of us just couldn't breathe. It just got so funny in there. So.
Yeah, I would imagine so. For instance, in like an overdose call, there are probably a lot of things about an overdose call that are the same, right? Like, they're going to be in some location. There's going to be some level of chaos in the area that went around it. So I would imagine that the things that kind of stand out about the calls becomes the odd things that differentiate them, and I can imagine there's just got to be some. I mean, I wouldn't want anybody to see my house right now, and I just imagine it says apparently I had EMTs in my house yesterday, down in the basement, because one of my son's friends overdosed in the basement, and they hit him with Narcan. But when my kids told me that had happened when I came home from work, all I could think about was, what were they thinking when they walked through the front door and my house looks like a garage inside?
Yeah.
I would imagine that's the kind of shit where as you're going to the call and you're about to do something extremely important to save somebody's life, there's something that happens that makes you go, "What the hell is going on here?"
Right, right. Um, there was there's one especially. I'm not gonna get into too much about it. Um, but basically, we responded to a um, possible cardiac arrest, which ended up being intoxicated male. You know. So, long story short, he almost took out my ability to have kids. He bit another paramedic. Yeah, and he took a swing on Ryan, if I remember correctly. And after immediately after the fact, getting back in the engine, Ryan started bugging out on God, country, the earth, the universe, everything. You know, oh, if he had heard one of you guys, I would have killed him. I would have done this. I would have done that. And that was that was a good one. That was one of the in the middle intensity type of deals. So he the smallest thing could light him off, and it's either in the best way possible or the worst way possible. Either way, you just you're expected to have a laugh with him, you know. And I'd like to think everybody has that type of person in their life that is like that. Um, so
Well, I would imagine that when you're around trauma every single day, right? There's a level of pressure that slowly builds,
Mm-hmm.
and we've talked about this many times on the show. You never know what's going to be what's going to hit that relief valve, and when it comes loose and you snap or you let off all that steam, the event that triggered it usually has absolutely nothing to do with what you're pissed off about. It's just the thing that did it. you know, it's that last straw, and you got to have those periodic, pressure releases. But
right, right.
sometimes people ask you like, "Why are you flipping out about this?" You know, like you just don't even get it right now. It's not about that. I can't imagine as a leader, dealing with that all the time.
Yeah, as a leader, you're trying to compose yourself as such, but you're also human. So at some point, you're gonna pop. It doesn't matter, if you're a leader or not. You're human. You're gonna feel it something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
So
if you've got any level of empathy, yeah.
right, exactly.
Hey, Kyle, let me ask you something.
Hmm.
Knowing what you, after putting up with my nonsense for all this time and after loss of Ryan and whatnot, if there's one change or more that you would like to see occur for mental health in the fire service, what would it be?
Um, definitely a lot of widespread representation. Um, it's talked about, it's emphasized, but more so to a local manner. Um, department to department, not in such a wide manner where it's gonna spread to every single person that is suffering from this or is involved in that service, or just starting off. So definitely more widespread emphasis on that it's very possible to get it in the fire service, and there are ways to combat it. Um, it's you're never alone when combating it. And I know like to think that in his final moments, Ryan knew that um, he had, yourself, myself, Jonathan, his parents, and so many other people that loved him and cared about him. But there was something that ate him to the point where, and it just didn't let go. It did not let go.
As you've heard me say on other occasions, there's something that he kept inside that he couldn't let out of his mouth to relieve the pain, the stress, the shame, the whatever. And he saw no other way. And I have to admit, I mean, he knew what I do for a living. He sent me referrals when I found out about it. I admit, and I told his folks this, my first reaction, I was pissed. I'm like, are you out of your goddamn mind? All the resources you had at your disposal, and you did this. I was hot, and now I'm just flummoxed. But then again, a way of thinking about this that we've said on other podcasts is it's not that he wished to die. He just wished to no longer live. And the difference between the two is in those final moments when he was getting more and more narrow in his focus, he couldn't visualize a life without the same level of pain that he was feeling in that moment. And he didn't want to end his life. He wanted the pain to stop. And there's a difference between the two. I don't know if that makes any sense to you at all, but that's just my take on it.
Yeah, for sure. There's the outside, then there's the inside. And everybody sees the outside of a person. And it's very easy for that person to put on, a great cover. Ryan did especially. Even if he was feeling stressed out or angry or whatever, he always put on a happy face to take care of everybody else, because he was that person where he couldn't face his own problems before he faced other people's problems. And he always took it upon himself to make sure that we were okay. And inside there's definitely a lot that was breaking him, and he didn't take time to analyze that, and in turn that is what ate him. Had he taken more time to analyze himself and get help or talk to somebody besides us, the outcome definitely would have been different.
Yeah.
It's common for, just like people in the military, you don't come home every day and unload on your family all your problems and stresses of the day, right? Because the people you love, you're always trying to take care of. And that happens with leaders too. Leaders they're trying to take care of their people. And it sounds to me like, from everything you've described about Ryan, he's one of those people who's always taking care of you guys. And every time you don't say something, the weight of that doesn't seem very significant by itself. But, on the military side, we'll call it, you stuff it down, right? But what you don't know is how, over time, how much have you stuffed down?
Yep.
How heavy is that weight getting that you keep, building, one stone at a time, one pebble at a time? And, knowing the right time to be able to ask for help, or to tell somebody, hey, I've got to kind of share this with you. That's a tough judgment to make, because in the moment that you do that, you're semi feeling like you're okay, right? So you kind of question yourself sometimes about, do I really need to bring this up right now? It's not that bad. I'm okay right now, And like I was telling Doc Barry before we came on, one of the hardest things is for people that are in depression and are feeling like they're in a level of despair, because lately I've been having my own issues with that, is you're not in you're not really the best person to make those decisions for yourself anymore, you know. And that all becomes a result of not doing all the things, you know, maybe you could have done along the way to lighten that load. And I was thinking when you came on, one of the good things that won't feel like it right now, but as you go through your Navy career, I think you're going to take away from this is you're going to be probably more open than most people with other sailors about letting off steam, or you checking on them or telling them, you know, hey, don't stuff that stuff out, let's talk about it, you know? And you'll be able to teach people to kind of, you know, not let things build up to that point. And it's one of those things where when you do it right, there's no beacon that goes off to say, hey, look at this great job that you're doing, because nothing is happening. Nothing bad has happened. You know, you can't measure the things that didn't happen, but the fact that nothing's happening, you know, is really all you can go off of. But I think that's going to be a good thing in you that you're going to be able to take from this, is to make sure that the people you work with, and as you continue to move up the ranks, is to instill that into other sailors and stuff. To, you know, it takes the stigma off of it for people to be able to talk about it and go, hey, I got something that I'm having trouble with, you know, I'm a little unbalanced with this thought right now, and maybe I can bounce it off you. You know, it doesn't seem like a whole lot, one little piece at a time, but man, it makes a difference. Just coming to this webcast every week lets off pressure for me. And yeah,
I definitely
that's one of the takeaways.
Yeah, I definitely think, you know, one of the biggest goals that people can try and take away from, you know, listening to this and going about is breaking that stigma of, you know, you're alone. You can't go get help. You know, and it's such a massive stigma that's not, you know, drilled to the floor. And you know, after this, you know, I'm always open to letting how I'm feeling out, and not just any, you know, random person. You know, I'll go to, you know, maybe I'll give Doc a call, or you know, go to Chaps. The day after Ryan had passed, actually, I didn't even hesitate. I had left class early, I went right to the chaplain, and I probably sat with him for 2 hours. And you know, even though it was the day after we had just lost Ryan, it felt like 200 pounds was coming off of my chest. So, you know,
And
that's
to that end, let me illustrate a very important point. Not just, I'm just saying, not just for your benefit. Nate's heard me say this 100 times before, that's why he's fallen asleep. But right now, what we are doing, the three of us, is we are doing something that Ryan, for whatever reason, felt he could not. We're talking about it. And I just found out, guess who's listening in right now in the audience? Is Bob and Cindy.
all right.
Ryan's parents logged in, and the only thing that somebody wrote for either one of them in the message, probably his mom, was just the word tears. So hopefully this will help them with the healing process as well. And what we're also hoping for you, and you nailed it, Kyle, a few minutes ago, whoever listens to this has the courage to reach out and ask for help. Stigma be damned. one of my I don't know if I told you this story. Nate's heard it before. One of my combat Marines who did a few attachments with recon. You know, he was a varsity player. Said to me years ago, he says, "You know, Doc," with that magnificent, thick, heavy New York City accent of his, he says, "You know, Doc, I hate to ask anybody for help." And I said, "Oh, really? Okay. Well, here's a combat scenario for you. Let's say you're out in the dunes. You know somebody's going to come over the hill who's trying to kill you in the next 2 minutes. You don't have a working weapon, you're out of ordnance, but the only thing you have that's working is a radio. What's the first thing you're going to do?" And he said, "Well, the first thing I'm going to do is get on that goddamn radio." And then he looked at me and said, "You son of a bitch." And I said, "You mean you're going to ask somebody for help? Is that what I'm hearing, or am I getting old?" And he goes, "All right, fucker, you made your point." But he said, "You made your point." And he remembers that, and he uses that to get other guys to open up, because there's no goddamn difference at all between asking for help out in the bush and asking for help back out here in the world. But not for just the usual reasons. For those who have seen combat, and Nate, you can attest to this chapter and verse better than I can, the war never goes away. So, because you're always approaching the next day to a certain extent as a mission. So, the war continues, and we all, therefore, must ask for help. Hopefully that
Especially
made
in
sense.
that first responder community. Everybody, when you call it backup, nobody's got a problem of the idea of calling for backup when you need backup.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
It's making that switch of, hey, I personally need some backup. You know, that's a little bit. That's not an easy thing to approach. I mean, you have to teach yourself to do that, because what do we do our whole lives? You know, we teach our children, they be self-sufficient, learn how to figure out problem solve for yourself. You know, and then as you get older, take care of the people that are under you. You know, and we don't do very well, you know, through life is, hey, and if you're feeling like this, or something doesn't seem right, ask for help for yourself. It's that's everywhere. That's not just
Mm-hmm.
you know the first responder community. I mean, we've got an effort going on in the Department of the Navy right now. You know, where they're looking at federal civilians in suicidal ideations. Right? It's like you would think for as long as human beings have been around, we'd have all this figured out by now. But there's no easy answer to it.
Mm-hmm.
But like you said, and Doctor said recently too, that when you start talking for that first time, you realize how much weight came off
Mm-hmm.
that you didn't expect. That when I went in my first time, I didn't expect to feel any better about it. I was more stressed and concerned about what they were going to ask me and stuff. And then when I was done and I walked out of there, I was just like, oh my gosh, I could stand up straight again. You just don't realize how much it crushes you, pushes down on you.
Bob and Cindy say Kyle, they extend their love to you. By the way, I just checked the messages.
All right. Well, I love them too.
Yeah, so
Love them too.
they are tuning in right now. So the gospel is being forwarded to as many people as we can get to watch and listen to us and take action. And the other thing is, every time you tell your story, it gets easier to tell. Every time.
Oh, for
That's
sure.
for sure.
I've talked to chaplain on my shift about 3 times now,
Mm-hmm.
and every time it just gets easier and easier. You feel more of that weight, and then even stress of the job's getting you, just stress from something you're thinking about in the past is getting to you. Just talk to somebody, and it's like a pressure relief valve. When you let it off, it resets itself. So you're kind of resetting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And when you relieve that pressure, then you can start thinking again. What a thought.
Right.
Because instead of trying to get past it, and ignoring it and not looking at it, right? When you talk to somebody about it, you're actually working through it. You're processing it. You're making sense of it. You're learning from it and growing from it. And it'll become, it won't hurt as much years down the road. It doesn't mean it means any less to you. You've just processed it a lot more and you've worked your way through it. And, Doc Berry, however many years ago, asking me to come and to be his prop for the first time.
Discussant.
He didn't say prop. That's my word.
It's a discussant.
But, I was just kind of like, sure, what the hell, I didn't think, I had no idea that we would come anywhere near this direction when we came. I never thought it would be anything I would want to talk to anybody about, let alone be someone in a position to try to encourage other people to talk about it. That first time that I ever did it with an audience around me, all I could feel was all the eyeballs on me, whether they were actually looking at me or not. And as I worked through that stuff, and every time we got done doing, one of these talks, I would tell Doc Berry, I'm like, oh, those were different questions this time. It made me think about things I hadn't thought of. Every single time. How many times have we done that now, Doc?
16 times. And we're going to be doing it a 17th time in October. And yeah, we're going to do this probably until we're about, a pair of little old men. Well, I'm well on my way, so the hell with it. But no, what Nate has said, and stop me if I'm putting words in my mouth. Every time we do it as well as this, he finds it therapeutic. And Nate is
That's
very.
the one thing I can be certain about.
Yeah.
Is that it'll be different each time, and I'll get something out of it personally.
Nate has survived 2 wars, and he is very open about symptoms, and he will ask anybody in the audience, ask me any question. And I tell them, if for those of you who've never had a conversation with a combat vet before, it's a golden opportunity. And the discussions are really heavy duty and meaningful. The way normally when you do an analytic presentation, you read your paper and you have another analyst as your discussant, okay? And the discussant riffs off what you've read, what they like, what they don't, what they agree with, thoughts they may have, and then the floor is opened up for general questions. So as you guys know me, Nate especially, I never can do anything the right way or the normal way. I got to be a damn maverick and do it my way. I thought, why on God's green earth do I want to have another analyst as my discussant? Why not have a veteran who obviously is not a patient, a dear friend? And I said, will you do this with me? He said, where and when do you want me? And it adds the authenticity and takes a presentation that would normally be academic, intellectual, cerebral, and makes it visceral and emotionally immediate. And that's what makes this stick.
Right, because you get people, and now they're picturing stuff from your perspective, Doc. Nate, Luis, and seeing, hearing the saying "walk a mile in somebody's shoes" is never clear when you're talking to military, first responders, EMS, police. You definitely get, you have one life, but when you talk to people like that, you're living more than one, because you can kind of feel what's going on inside their head. Not exactly feel, but you can only imagine. If that makes sense.
That's an important distinction, because the stuff that I've been through is nothing compared to what a lot of other Marines and sailors have been through. Certainly what Doc Fonseca's been through, when I compare, what I went through and what he went through, his by far worse, far more traumatic. But when everybody talks and you see somebody else talk about the trauma that they've experienced, it's not about listening to a story like you would watch in a movie, right? Say, okay, well, this is worse or that wasn't worse. What you're actually doing is you're witnessing what trauma does to that person, what their trauma did to them as an individual.
Mm-hmm.
Um, People all the time will start out with, I'm in a small group at my church, and this guy's in the Air Force and he deployed, and I know what his job skill set is, and he's not somebody on the kinetic end, but I know that what he does, he understands that, you know, people are dying as a result of what he does. And he almost immediately wanted to kind of dismiss it, go, yeah, but I was like, don't do that. I'm like, whatever is traumatic to you, whatever is hard for you to deal with, that is real, you know?
Mm-hmm.
You can't just dismiss it because it seems like doesn't rise to the level of how bad somebody else's is. The worst thing that you've ever experienced in your life is the worst thing you've ever experienced in your life. You know,
Right.
If Luis has said out loud many times, and I'm not putting words in his mouth at all, he said, you can't compare traumas. If it hurts, it hurts. And coming from him, of his stature, that's makes it absolutely authentic and believable. And for what it's worth, Kyle, I've said on other podcasts, let me start it off with a question. Have you ever heard the name Audie Murphy before, Kyle?
Audie Murphy. It sounds familiar.
Okay. I just dated myself with that question. When I was a kid, everybody knew who Audie Murphy was. World War II was huge in my house. My dad served stateside. He enlisted in 45 when the war was ending, but he was still part of, bring the guys home operation. My maternal grandfather, he was an Army captain, decorated, Bronze Star. He was in South Bavaria in combat. So World War II was immense in my house, the point of this being. And everybody who knew the name Audie Murphy was, and I think still is, the most decorated soldier in the history of this country. If you've ever seen pictures of him, and look him up, man. You're going to be reading about Superman within 10 seconds. He looks like a Christmas tree. You don't see uniform. You just see ribbons and devices. I mean, really.
But he's also not an imposing figure either. You look at him and go, this guy did what?
Yeah, he's all of 5'2", and he looks like an altar boy, but apparently he was a ferocity unparalleled over there. And he came home, and he knew something was horribly wrong. He knew he was not the same person when he came back, and he started to sleep with a loaded 45 under his pillow, married twice, a bunch of other, now we know, classic symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. And he petitioned the government, a guy of his stature, petitioned the government and took them to task and said, listen, we've got to look into more of this because you don't come back from this the same person at all. And he was urging people to talk about it openly. Now, that was back in the 40s when nobody was talking about it. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning this to you is, for God's sakes, gentlemen, and anybody else who's listening, if somebody like Audie Murphy can encourage everybody to ask for help, that opens the door. That makes it okay. When you have a giant who's in terrible pain, as he was all of his life when he came home, that should open the door for more discussion. And to that end, I'll shut up after this point because I could talk for an hour. Disclosure breeds disclosure. Disclosure breeds more disclosure. Think about that. Go.
Yeah, it's, how many guests have been on the show because they were, how do you say it? Impressed is not the right word. They saw somebody else they knew speak on here. And
Yep.
then they start to feel a little bit more open about it, and less that some levels or layers of shame, self-shame, get peeled off of that.
Right.
And I'm sure, Kyle, that the fact that you're doing this now, and it's only been 4 months, and you've talked about, you've gone to the chaplain a couple times already. You won't know when it happens, but I think one day you're going to realize, like, shit, I'm talking about this out in the open now with small groups of people because it's going to become easier for you to talk about it. You're going to have more understanding with it, and you're going to end up helping other people. It's just going to come naturally because you're going to see it and start to talk about it, you know. And then those people, somebody is going to share with you, and you're going to learn even more from it. And it's that's the one thing that's for sure, you know, about suicide is that there are people that they're gonna be able to use it, take away from it something good that they can use to help other people.
Like at this
Because when
stage,
it's
and
somebody you care about, you know.
yeah, at this stage, in time, I'm not sure I'm ready to turn it into an educational lesson yet.
Yeah,
But
no, I get you.
at the same time, like, I know I can eventually make it so because I have used a lot of our prior incidents, you know, whether it be myself or, you know, me, Ryan, Jonathan as a group, whatever we faced, you know, I use some of that as teachable lessons to other people to help them.
Yeah.
You know.
Well,
Well,
I hate to break it, Kyle. I hate to break it to you. Somebody's going to see this, and you're already doing it. So,
Right,
you-
right.
You're a lot further ahead. You're a lot further ahead than you realize.
oh yeah.
It took me 17 years before I finally went to go see somebody to say, hey, something's not right here. You know, and I don't know what it is. You know, 17 years of stuffing it. So what was I? I was 35, 36 years old at the time. And you've got a good head start at keeping that pressure relieved.
Hey, Nate.
And then one day being able to help others do the same.
And Nate, if you're up to it, if you feel like it, tell the story about the general.
Oh gosh.
That's a great story, and he's told this
I'm
many
not
times.
sure. I don't know what made you think about that. But,
Asking for help.
oh yeah. Well.
Oh yeah.
It's because it was also prophetic because the day that it happened. So it was the day that I came to the realization that I needed help from somewhere, from somebody. I don't know what it is, what it looks like, but I got to call somebody. And this is before the VA and the military really changed the way things were done. And I was making phone calls all over the place. Nobody could. I mean, they were talking about, yeah, we've got an appointment 90 days out, and I'm like, what? I'm like, get me somebody today. You know, I was at that point, like, how the hell am I going to make it through today? And finally, I got a hold of somebody that, you know, kind of talked me down from it, set me up with appointments, you know, gave me their number to call them back if I need anything in the meantime. And then I decided, okay, I'm going to go into work. And so I walked. I was parked in the parking lot doing this for several hours. I go to walk in the building, and there's like nobody. All the cars are in the parking lot, but there's like nobody in the building. So I'm asking the sergeants at the front desk. I'm like, where the hell is everybody? Like, oh, mandatory training today. It just came up. Everybody's over at Mainside, the theater. Suicide awareness brief. And I was like, what the hell? You know, and at this point, I'm still an atheist, so I'm not. You know, for people that are seeing signs out of this, I wasn't seeing them. And so I drive down there, and the guest speaker is a younger guy, probably in his early 30s, and his dad. And this gentleman goes around the United States and speaks about suicide awareness. And what was different about him is he was a suicide survivor. He jumped off of the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco and survived it. And so he had this unique perspective that you don't get to hear from people. And so one of the things he shared is his immediate thought the moment after he went over the railing was, oh my God, I made the worst mistake of my life. But it was already too late for him to change it, you know. But so that he was sharing a story and talking about this stuff. But the introduction in the military, that whoever's in charge, the most senior person's always got to get up there and say something, whether it makes any sense or not. The general officer got up there on stage, and instead of just introducing these gentlemen and what we're going to be talking about, he starts to say, hey, this is going to be your suicide awareness brief for the year. And and he thinks he's doing something good in this moment. He's like, I just want to say that if any of you are thinking about doing something stupid or taking your own life, then I can't even remember now the word he said, but basically it's like, you're a pussy, or you're a weakling, you're not strong, you're not showing strength. And it was just dead silence in there. And I was in the back just thinking to myself, oh my gosh, if there were any of these people in this room today that were considering it or thinking about it or anywhere on that spectrum of I might be going down that road, they're definitely not going to say anything now. Because all he did was pile on more stigma. And I just, and you're like, really? Today? There are still people like that. And I saw something recently that even within the realm of mental health, there are people that maybe that don't deal specifically with trauma, but there are people that are still like that even in the mental health community, that are dealing with other issues that don't fully understand it, don't know what you absolutely should not say. And I don't know what the answer is. I don't know if, do we start teaching this in school?
And I think the thing is that you're never gonna find a definitive answer. So what we're doing here is we're trying to help people get through some of their worst times, and avoid a life lost by suicide, and then 2 lives, and then 3 lives. Trying to save in the best way human life, and there's no answer to why the ones we can't save, we couldn't save. Only they know the answer,
Right.
and they took it with them.
Yeah. One of the good things about doing these webcasts and having them recorded, I've had somebody ask me, like, well, how many views do you have? I'm like, well, it's not really about the view count to us, It's like, yeah, we've got one out there that's got, I think, close to 600. Some of the newer ones we posted have only got like 30 something. Explaining to them, it's not about being viral. It's about when somebody is looking and searching for an answer. Maybe this will be something that they stumble across. Maybe somebody from yours, and what town was that in? Well, you don't have to say it, but somebody from the town that you and Ryan were from might remember you, right? 10 years from now, and come across this and go, man, I knew that guy, but I didn't know about the stuff that he's sharing in this video. And then look what Kyle went through, and he's going to be able to see that, like you said, the chain is going to break. They're going to be able to see that there is life after, trauma, that people can make a choice to stop letting it attack them, like you're doing, talking about it.
Right.
And so even if a video sits out there and has 0 views for 20 years, all it's got to do is find that one right person that's affected by it,
Right.
And right now it doesn't seem like much, but I don't know if YouTube's still going to be around 20 years from now, or it might be some other thing by then. But I think you're going to look back at this video too and look at it and go, man, is that really me? And you'll have changed so much by then. I've changed so much just doing this with Doc Perry. But there's going to be a lot of people that are going to gain from what you're learning about what you've experienced.
Two things here.
Yeah.
Cindy just typed in the messages. Cindy just typed in, and I quote, He's a lot stronger than he thinks he is, meaning you, Kyle. Okay? And the other thing I'll tell you is what Nate's saying is true here. It's a valid message, and it's an eternal message. Every time we do this, we're making changes. There's the changes that we do hear about, which can be kind of rare, but there are probably many changes in people's lives that we never hear about. And I've even gotten a few private messages, something along the lines of, "Hey Doc, you don't know who I am, but I was pretty close to doing myself in, and I heard about you guys, and now I'm not going to do myself in. I'm going to get this fixed." So we're already making it happen. For God's sakes, keep it up.
Right.
And if somebody does that from this video, you know, they've done it with other videos. Doc Berry will share that with you privately, so you'll know.
And hey, listen, while we're at it, if Ryan knew that you were doing this video right now, Kyle, what would he have to say about it? Serious question, man.
I think he'd, if you're still here, he'd probably end up being another guest. You know,
That's
he
right.
would definitely be one to really add some constructive emphasis on dealing with stress. You know, he saw both sides, fire and EMS, and obviously, you know, EMS is a much more stressful job. I mean, yeah, fire's stressful enough, but at the same time, you know, EMS, you never know where you're going, what you're dealing with. In Ryan's case, it was about an hour drive down to Albany and an hour drive back. That could take a toll on you, and you won't even realize it. God knows your patients are not always the most, what's the word I'm looking for, supportive of your efforts, and that it's just everything you do definitely can add stress in the EMS field. So, and Ryan saw a lot of that, and that, you know, obviously one of the bigger contributing factors to his passing. That stress leads to just unseen demons, and those demons end up controlling you.
Yep.
So
Sometimes some of us refer to that as the darkness. You know, and I don't know if you're a spiritual or religious person, but when you feel that darkness or the demons coming around, that's when you got to remind yourself that you're not going to let them win, you know, because it seems like it always comes up on you, whether it's internal self-doubt or something like that. For me, it's when I'm having great ideas about, hey, here's how we can take the show and do this, or, you know, this retreat kind of thing that I want to do. Here's the people, you know, that we could possibly help and ways we could get people to it. It always seems to be in those moments where I'm starting to feel like something great is coming out of it. It turns out those are the times that I have to be the most on guard, because the enemy will come and snatch those good ideas from you. Those times when you're doing good and you're starting to feel better and feeling like you can make something good out of it, will come and steal it from you. You know, it's
The wolf is always at the door.
Oh, for sure.
But if you're aware that he's always there, you know, and on guard, and then you can defend against it, you know, and figure out what works for you to not let the demons in, you know.
Yeah. You know, personal experience. Doc knows where this is about to go. I'm not gonna get too in depth about it, but 2021, I was involved in a traffic accident. long story short, patient passed away. I'm still here. And my way of coping with that was actually advice from Ryan. Um, you know, he kind of recommended meditation and finding music that calms you down or going for a run, sports, hiking, any basically finding a trigger to counter the trigger of stress, if that makes sense. And
Uh-huh.
for me, I don't know if this is coincidence. I always found relaxation in the blues, which is ironic because that's how my father coped with stress many years ago, being a firefighter himself. So, there's
Did you say the
always,
blues?
yes, yep, like,
Uh-huh.
so, there's always ways to fight the wolf at the door, as you so well put it, Doc.
Yeah, the key is finding finding the way to to cope with it. That's not an escape, right?
Mhm.
That doesn't become an addiction away from it.
Right.
Because so many of us, first try it out by like, I'll just get drunk and shit faced and forget about it. But you realize you didn't work through shit, you didn't process it, you didn't think about it, you're just ignoring it, And it was Doc Barry, I think, the first person to ever say this, or the first person I ever heard say it was, it's an addiction from something,
Mhm.
and that's not addiction is not coping, An addiction is when you develop that addiction, you're just switching problems. Something else, and the original problem is still there.
Right.
When somebody goes out occasionally to get toasted at a party or something like that, but can live without it, that's technically alcohol. I'll use it, alcohol abuse, right? So in other words, that guy or gal is boozing in order to feel good. Now, the addict, on the other hand, that's a guy or a gal who is boozing in order to avoid feeling bad. That's the addict right there. And I'm sure some of my colleagues will disagree, and that's just fine. But I don't think people have alcohol problems. I really don't, or drug problems. I do think they have emotional problems, and they use whatever the substance may be to cope, or not,
Mhm.
depending on how you look at it.
Yeah, for one of my kids, when I can tell he's at that point where he's going to start drinking, I remind him, that drink to feel even better. You're already feeling good about something because something great happened, and you're celebrating. Then drink to feel even better. But if you're drinking so you can feel better, it's not going to work. It never does.
Mhm. Yeah,
So,
the alcohol definitely has that double effect. Like you said, Nate. You're feeling really happy, that can boost your excitement. But you're feeling stressed, that can boost your stress. So it goes two ways.
and then there's no getting away from it being a depressant, right?
Right. Right.
I mean, if you don't stop at some point, you're going to end up crying or passing out.
Yeah.
Sometimes both.
Yeah.
And you'll have a liver like a doorstop.
For sure. For sure.
Hey Kyle, what if you're okay with that, with answering, what's your MOS in the Navy? What do you do?
Right now I'm an undesignated fireman, so that just means I don't have an official rate yet. But I'm looking to strike engineman. So, prior to this, I was a mechanic for a year. So, still no stranger to turning wrenches or getting completely soaked in diesel fuel and oil.
Is that that
So,
program where you don't have an MOS guaranteed? You just try a bunch of different things.
something like that, yeah.
Uh, what I'm thinking might have been something else, but it sounds kind of similar. You get to try a few things out.
For the uninitiated and the unaware, what is an engine man? I've never heard the term before. Educate me.
Engineman just um, maintains the main spaces around the ship. You're in charge of the engines and all the equipment that goes with it, and just making sure that the ship can move smoothly from one place to another. And obviously, the more years you have, the more knowledge you'll get on those systems. So you'll be better handled to handle something that might happen. Because obviously, if there's problems, you have to be able to fix it. You're at sea. Um, you're not calling for help. You know.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Like an
The first
on-site
time I
mechanic.
was
Yep.
the first time I was ever on ship, that was one of the things that struck me was how many people that are on the ship, their job is to fix the ship and keep it running when shit goes wrong. Like the, the like having a certain amount of raw steel and pipes and stuff like that, so you can fix shit as it breaks. Like, it's something I had never thought of, because for most people, the biggest thing you have that needs to get fixed is your car, and you can usually catch a taxi back home, and then the tow truck will grab your car for you. But
Mhm.
not so much out there on the middle of the ocean.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's definitely, in my opinion, a great rate. One I'm looking forward to. I'm already debating, doing career, so very excited about it.
Hot spaces, though, man.
Yeah, yeah. Um, best way to put that. Takes some getting used to, but if you've been around it before, or at least you know situations like that, you're no stranger to it. Um, I've been exposed to higher heats than that space, so I'm definitely able to cope with it.
I guess there becomes a point when you just okay, yes, I'm gonna sweat.
Hmm.
It's kind of like
Mhm.
being in the infantry. Um, I didn't realize how much the way I thought was different than the new guys coming in. So I was 30 years old when I became an officer. I was out there in the field with some young people. They were 22, 23 years old, and it would start raining, and the discomfort would still get to them, you know. So they
Mhm.
would get miserable really easy, you know. And it would start pouring rain, and I could just sit out there on a camp stool in the pouring rain and just keep eating my food while it was pouring rain on me. And they're like, "How can you do that?" I'm like, "Because I'm already wet." And I guess I would imagine being an engine man's got to be like that too, right? So, like, okay, yeah, I know that when I go into work today, I'm just gonna be all sweaty.
Right.
So, just like a mechanic knows that they're gonna be greasy.
Mhm. Mhm.
But I'm heat intolerant from a heat stroke that I had, so anytime I think about heat, I'm just like, oh man. It didn't
Yeah.
used to bother me, but it does now.
Right.
Try moving up
Especially,
here.
yeah. Me
I
and
tell you, Doc.
me and Doc, being from New York, kind of know um, the whole spectrum of weather, because
Hmm.
New York is the most bipolar state that there is.
Every time I watch Weather Nation, and every time I see the weather change in the Albany area, I'm like, whoa. I'm like, how much snow is he getting? And then it seems like the next week it's like 60, and I'm like, what?
Hmm.
But I love snow, so
Well, come on up here anytime you want. Bring,
yeah,
take as
you know,
much of it back as you like.
The problem with that part of New York is it's in New York. Yeah, I
You
don't want to have
see,
my retirement taxed.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
actually, my uncle had sent me a news bulletin. So he lives in New Hampshire, and Mount Washington had gotten to negative 110 degrees last week during a little polar
Wow,
vortex. It's like I could
that's
That,
not.
that kind of that's the kind of cold that if you blink, your eyelashes freeze shut, right? You get
Literally, but there's
ice
also
in your nose.
there's always that one person that probably goes through their head and says, I can do this naked, running through all that, and there's always one person, and then
mhm.
there's people like us that's like you can't even fathom being in like the best weather gear, you know. 110 below, that's crazy.
Yeah, that is nuts. That's gotta be like a record for the country. I would think
Oh
it's
yeah.
got to be up there.
Mhm.
Jesus.
And where the hell do you get a thermometer that goes to 110 below?
Call up Dr. Kelvin.
Yeah, yeah. It was 70 degrees here today, which is really weird because February is usually the time we get the most snow.
Hmm.
And it was like I wore a coat into work today and then I had to carry it on the way out to the parking lot. It was 70 and I had the window rolled down. I'm like, what the hell's going on? But I still love the snow. I love watching idiots trying to drive in the snow who have no business driving.
You'll fit right. You'll fit right in up here, man. Believe me.
That's why I got to get my Jeep back up and running again. I don't
Yeah.
want to miss out on what's left of this year's.
But anyway, getting back to the original question, we are still at a deplorable state of affairs where we have at least 22 service members daily, and I think the numbers. Nate and I have spoken, and Luis too. We believe the numbers may be even higher, and we are still, last I knew, in a state of affairs where firefighters are taking their own lives faster than the fires that they fight. And the same thing for the cops, and the same thing for emergency medical services. And this god awful epidemic has
Mhm.
got to stop. And the only way it's going to stop is discussions, frequent, not just one off. I mean, frequent discussions such as these.
Right.
So, in your situation, Kyle, you couldn't do none of us could do a damn thing to save Ryan. So maybe we can take the anguish and the sadness and what we've learned from this and save somebody else.
Right. And that's all you can hope for.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah,
You,
don't take that unintentional transfer of pain onto yourself. You know,
No way.
just just let it be out there.
And I'll tell you one other thing too. I had never seen a full service uh, funeral for a firefighter in terms of the wake, as well as the processional and going underneath an enormous American flag, which was suspended between two ladder trucks. I had never seen. You can see YouTube videos of this sort of thing all day long, and it doesn't do the real thing justice. So it came to that point in the proceedings where the bagpiper started playing Amazing Grace, and I could hear that cry, that tear of emotions around me. I was like maybe 6 feet away from his mom when that started blowing, and I'm like, oh my God. So the only thing we can do is try to take our memories from that day and make sure that it doesn't happen to anybody else.
mhm. Mhm. There's no way of putting this lightly, but as beautiful as the processions are, how it's handled by um, those home departments and neighboring departments and the forces that gathered behind the families of the fallen.
Mm-hmm.
that's what we're trying to prevent. We're trying to prevent that procession. We're trying to, make that a life lived out to the fullest.
Right.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah.
I definitely see um, things like this making a difference.
Mhm.
It's just, we have to make it a matter of how much of a difference we can make. And, when they start getting more and more people involved, and then maybe they start doing something like this, or they just talk to somebody to know about it,
Mhm.
that's what you're getting at.
And the other thing is, to anybody who's listening to this, you don't have to be a psychologist and have a bunch of letters after your name. All you have to do is be a very good listener. And both of you guys have heard me say this, I'm sure, by now. It means turning your phone over, even turn it off. Make very steady eye contact and be 1000% emotionally present and with the person who's trying to talk to you. Do a hell of a lot more listening than talking. Be with them. Maybe an occasional question every once in a while, but let them do all the talking. And it's all about de-escalating, 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 so that the poor, wound up, worn down to nothing person can actually start to think again. I can't make it
And
any plainer than that.
that's definitely a hard thing to do. Obviously it sounds easier said than done. You look at TV shows and movies, and they try and make a portrayal of it, and then when you're in the real thing, there is no comparison.
Mm-hmm.
Because one small misstep can lead to that procession the next day that we're trying to prevent. And so
Mm-hmm.
you really
It's
have to be like, you either have to be there or just not even trying to attempt to, because if you're not there, then you're making no difference anyhow.
Mm-hmm.
we've. It's funny, we've in society. Even I work in the D.C. area, Pentagon, Washington Navy Yard, sometimes in some other places in that area, and we've gotten to this point where people are so afraid that if they don't have a credential, right? I'm not a trained psychotherapist. I'm not a therapist. They're afraid. I don't know if they think that they're going to get sued or whatever. That it's like nobody's telling you go and diagnose somebody. No one's telling you go solve their problem for them. Don't go and tell them how to put their mind on something else. All that we're saying, all you got to do is what we're doing here. Just listen.
Mm-hmm.
It's There's nothing wrong with listening. You're not going to do anything wrong by listening.
Yeah,
But Kyle,
being
here's
an
a
active
question for
listener
you.
is the best you can. What's that, Doc?
Hey Kyle, how good a listener was Ryan? You knew him much better than I do.
Ryan was good. He was if you asked to talk about something with him, and you made it known that it was something like serious, like if you're at the firehouse, phone in the locker, and he'd pull you into the office. Um, you'd have his full attention. He was never one to allow a distraction to be in the way of making sure that you are okay. So he was definitely one of a kind person.
Mm-hmm.
And failing basic training in 2018 and being where I'm at now made me appreciate the time that I had with him and the time that we served together. Because if I didn't fail basic training in 2018, I would have never went home, and I wouldn't have had those 4 years with him. I would have had those 4 years with the Navy. So, there's a there's a downside to it. But at the same time, that's 4 years that we got to know each other, and that's 4 years that I will always value. And that especially
Unforgettable.
puts emphasis on with every action there's a reaction. I know I'm not saying that right, but you know,
Yeah, yeah. If you take that time, and we say it was 2018.
yes, yep,
If you look at that time in 2018 and you only look at that, then yeah, the only thing you're gonna get from it is failure. But if you broaden your gaze, right, and you look at, okay, this happened, but look at all these other things that happened. It really wasn't a failure. It's just a refocusing of the opportunities that you had.
hmm
Even when you're doing something good, right? Different opportunities pop up. It doesn't really matter whether it's good or bad. It's, it wasn't a death sentence, you know,
Mhm.
failing through it. It
right,
gave you different opportunities. One of them was getting to spend time with Ryan.
And Cindy just
right.
typed into the chat, and I'm quoting here. Hang on. She says, "Just so you guys know, the fire trucks just went by my house. I think Ryan is with us and approves."
That's awesome.
For sure, for sure.
Mm.
Um, and 4 years later, 2022, Ryan was one of the bigger influences into me going back. So there's definitely a return on that.
Yeah. And then you're gonna, now you're gonna spread something good out of this to this,
hmm
to all these other, sailors that you run into.
Yeah.
And the thing I would challenge you with, because it's, even though we're talking about it this way, right? It's not something we consciously think about all the time. When we talk about distributing the burden and sharing the load, right? You see somebody else hurting or whatever, they need to talk, and you go and you listen to them. You're taking some of that load off of them, but you got to remember that load doesn't disappear, right? You took some of it off of them, but now you're carrying it. So the
Right.
more people that you talk to, the more people that you listen to, and the more people that you help, that means Kyle's got to go out there and also unload and spread it amongst
Mhm.
other people
hmm
too, because you can't
And
just
then
keep
when you
carrying
start
it,
to do that,
you know. And
they talk to you, you talk to somebody else, they talk to somebody else. Now you're distributing the load to the point where it's not bearing down on one person, and it makes it easier to get through.
yeah, oh yeah, yep.
That is correct. That is
It's
absolutely
like
correct.
if you're on a hike and somebody handed you somebody else's pack, it sucks. But if they just hand you one thing out of that pack and it gets spread amongst everybody else, not a big deal. I can carry some socks,
hmm
but I'm not carrying all your shit.
Yep.
Yeah,
By
that's
the way, for what it's worth, over at Bob and Cindy's, they had a get together. I think it's going to be the first of many. It was potluck, bring a dish, and a lot of people came over and were telling Ryan stories and so on and so forth, distributing the burden, talking about it instead of keeping it in and whatnot.
Yep.
One thing that Cindy told me that really says a lot about his character is um, he would have probably not been comfortable getting Firefighter of the Year. This is what she told me. She said he would have said, "Here, please give this to somebody who really, don't give it to me, give it to somebody else."
Yeah. For us, it was never about the widespread recognition. I mean, yeah, we were acknowledged, banquets and other events. Thank you, Kyle, Ryan, John. But for us, what we did was enough. Just helping those few people that we could was enough in a way. So
Yep.
I definitely think
yeah. Can you imagine how scary would that? Go ahead. Go ahead.
I definitely think Ryan would have kind of passed that off. Sent it back, got his name taken off of it, and had it go to somebody else.
Seems like all the good leaders are like that.
Mm-hmm.
I know somebody who rates a Purple Heart but won't accept it.
Hmm.
But man, imagine how much it would suck if people that went into service, people that became firefighters and EMTs, if on the front end of it they're like, yeah, I want to do this because I want all the parades, and I want all the recognition, and I want all the. I can't wait to go to the restaurants where people, give me a discount on my food. Man, that would be some scary shit.
And what they don't realize, saying that they want all the parades, and this really applies to um, military life as well. You can attest to this, Nate. Is that it's not just about the recognition, about the uniform that we wear. We're carrying with us generations of, especially World War II, World War One era, um, people who died wearing the uniform. So, and that's not, you don't really think about it in the widest sense, but when you do, if you actually sit down and think about it, that's actually a very heavy burden to carry.
Yeah. I had a company commander. I was in Somalia, who quoted an REM song, basically. But what he reminded people is you're standing on the shoulders of giants, right?
Hmm.
Don't don't uh, don't dirty the names of those who went before you who did great things. Just you got to carry that tradition on. It's it's funny because I've never met anybody yet who's joined the military and said that they went to the recruiter's office and asked to see a pay scale. It's one of these things that it came up one time in a meeting when we were talking about retention and keeping Marines in. I was like, the reasons why people stay are always different, and when you have a family, those other things start to come into play. But when people join and they go in, nobody walks in there asking to see the pay scale.
Hmm.
It's not even a factor. It's
Right.
It's selfless service, whether it's military, EMT, firefighters, law enforcement. They're not doing it for the paycheck. Later on, as they have a family and stuff like that, okay, yeah, they might start thinking about, well, where can I go? Because now they're providing for other people too. But when it's just them,
Yep.
it's completely selfless. So it doesn't surprise me, when you have people like Ryan. People say, yeah, they probably wouldn't want that recognition. I believe it,
Hmm.
because I can't imagine for as good as a leader he is, and the way you've been talking about him, and the way he conducted himself, I can't imagine him being a person that ever thought anything about that. Those kind of people are usually surprised when they get an award because it was the last thing on their mind.
Right. Right.
He knew it takes the whole team.
Yeah. And one day, um, pretty much everybody back home has said this. Doc, I'm sure you've heard somebody say it at some point or another talking about him. One day he would have been chief of the department. He would have been leading us all.
Easy,
For sure.
easy.
Um, the charisma he brought, he always made sure he had knowledge of a topic before talking about it. He was always looking for answers. So, he would, no doubt.
And gentlemen, since we're coming up on 9 o'clock, let that be the last word. Thanks for being with us, Kyle. Thank you. And thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Bob, and anybody else who's out in the studio audience. We appreciate it.
It's amazing that they're so willing to
Mm.
to without even talking to Doc Barry or I, immediately beforehand, saying please don't talk about this or not, just to be so open
Right.
Hmm.
and to know that there's going to be good coming out of this. that's an amazing thing to do, because I don't know how I would handle it
Right.
personally. I know how I
Right.
would want to, but I'm also an emotional person. I don't know how I would handle it. So that's huge. And I know that this wasn't an easy night for anybody here. But thank you for coming and being willing to share and talk about it and be open about it. And because there are going to be other people who gain from it.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
Learn.
absolutely. It's, like you said, definitely not an easy thing to talk about, but having discussions like this is what makes it,
Mm-hmm.
um, makes you be able to live with it more. And
Yeah.
that's what you know, the goal of this is to be able to live with it and move on with it. You
Mm-hmm.
know, don't look
Yeah.
at it as something you're trying to beat. Look at it as something that you're going to carry with you. So if you're going to carry it with you, you might as well learn to carry it.
Alrighty.
And as you said that, I think I understand a little bit more about how you said you go to the blues, because I was just thinking to myself, there's a song that I want Kyle to know about. I said, but it's gonna make him emotional. I was like, but that's the same reason I listen to that song, because it makes me emotional, because I want to feel in that moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
And plus, I'm at home, and so no one's gonna see what happens to me when I do it. But there's a song from a band named Codaline, and it's called Brother. And I think you'll get a lot out of that song, or
All right.
at least you're gonna feel a lot from that song. But
Yeah,
Nate,
definitely
send
I'll
it
give
to
that a listen.
send it to me. I'll send it to Kyle. I got his number.
yep. It's in Doc. I had you watch it when we were down in Charleston.
I knew as
It's the
soon
one I
as
told
it
you.
sounded familiar. Yeah.
Yeah, it's that one I want to. Yeah, I want to make my own video for it.
All right.
But yeah, I'll send it to you.
All right, gentlemen. It's not goodbye. It's until we meet again.